Welcome to Your Strata Property, the podcast for property owners looking for reliable, accurate, and bite-sized information from an experienced and authoritative source.
Hello and welcome. I'm Amanda Farmer and I have with me today Reena Van Aalst from Strata Central. Hey, Reena.
Hi, Amanda.
We're having a little giggle because we're actually looking at each other. We are live and in person today. Very rare. We're on a couch together. I have Reena. I'm reaching out and I'm giving her a little hug. It's great to see you.
Yeah, I think the last time we did an in-person one was back in Edgecliff, I think, about 2 years ago, Amanda, from memory, when we were both in the office together.
Yes, and that's probably been the only time,
yes.
I think. So we're here together in Brisbane. I'll be attending the Australian College of Strata Lawyers conference this week. Reena is jetting back to attend to the always urgent client demands, but we managed to sneak in a podcast chat before you jump on a plane.
Yeah, it's really nice, Amanda, to actually be in another location apart from Sydney and be together.
Yes, thank you for making the time. But as usual, we have our challenges in Strata. That's what we're here to talk about. We might throw a few wins in there as well. What's been challenging you this week, Reena Van Aalst?
Well, this is probably a challenge really more for strata managers than anything else, but I'm bringing the example of a building manager who has been assigned in one of our larger buildings the task of undertaking the work for the fire order, which obviously is in addition to their normal workload. And what the Strata Committee decided to do was to actually provide the building manager with an additional 16 hours of support paid to the building management company by the owners corporation, because what they could see and understand is that this building manager could not undertake all those functions of exercising the compliance with the fire order, meeting contractors, getting quotes, etc., in addition to the normal tasks that she's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to flip that to the converse for a strata manager who on many occasions has to deal with fire orders for a strata scheme, additional work. They have sometimes building defects they have to deal with for a particular scheme. There could be remedial works that require a lot of meetings and funding, usually by way of strata loans. With strata loans now, the meetings also require more onerous execution of paperwork by strata committees. They would now require, some institutions require the strata committee to confirm the loan, even though there are minutes. We also, as managers, have conflicts between, owners and committees. We have NCAT, we have mediation, and we have all these things in addition to our normal functions. But I've never really seen any owners corporation say, oh, well, you should have extra resources now. We're going to pay for that. Now, I suppose if I did ask for them in that way, they would say yes. But my point is that strata managers are tasked with running, say, a set number of buildings. However, the activity level will vary. Mm-hmm. And there's not enough resourcing in any company, I don't believe, that can take into account these challenges on the model of remuneration that's currently in place, I think, for most of our schemes.
So tell me this, are you talking about something more than additional services fees? So when something like litigation comes up or an insurance claim perhaps or a fire order, those services for helping an owners corporation deal with that are not included in your standard agreed management fee, but you can charge additional services fees.
Yes, that's exactly right, Amanda. But the problem is you need additional capacity. I'm not talking just about the remuneration. I'm talking about the capacity. So strata management companies need to really have either a spare manager or a spare personnel so that when these things arise, that person is there to perhaps either do the day-to-day management of the building so the manager can focus on these extra tasks or these more onerous, more time-consuming tasks. And therefore, I think the fixed fee arrangement, even though people are paying extra for additional services, you still got to be able to, a company has to carry that extra person, even though they'll be charged on, depending on what the remuneration model is. Because there are some companies that don't have such remuneration where everything is fixed and therefore, even if there's extra workload, they still don't have the capacity to charge extra. A building manager, for example, they're paid X amount of dollars, regardless of whether there's a fire order, whether there is any repairs. It could be times where it's smooth sailing. Whereas strata managers are paid X amount of dollars to do certain statutory functions, and then the rest is always charged in addition. So I think it's just the way that we had to look at the model. I don't think this model, with the workload that's now being experienced by managers, is going to be sustainable.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raised this because I've just come from 2 days with business owners, Strata business owners in Victoria. They had their SCA Principals Retreat up in Cairns. So room full of Strata management business owners and supplier business owners. And absolutely, of course, we were talking about this problem. Changing remuneration models if we're not going to have insurance commissions anymore. How do we factor that in? And we were talking about Strata managers getting a really good grasp or needing to get a really good grasp on the costs of doing business.
Yes.
And what you're highlighting here is that perhaps one of the costs of a Strata manager doing business is to carry an additional resource, whether that's a person or the ability to bring on a consultant or bring in somebody at short notice, carry that additional resource in case a building has an urgent need, then allocate that resource to that building so that you as the manager can continue to provide the usual services without interruption, without delay, without missing any of those important deadlines that you're often sharing with us, Reena. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And one of the reasons why we're not just talking about additional services fees, we're talking about the agreed management fee perhaps overall having to increase.
Yes.
Because that agreed management fee, and this is what we talked about in Cairns, that agreed management fee needs to cover and exceed, if you're going to be profitable, your costs, your everyday costs of doing business.
Exactly. And I think also too, when a manager is overloaded with activity in a certain building or a certain number of buildings, then the other buildings then fall on the wayside of manager. And then people are chasing you up and again, you're suffering reputational damage because you're not able to keep up with the email volume. And it's funny because my colleague and I were talking the other day because on Fridays, generally, we never used to have such a huge amount of emails. But now what we're noticing is that Friday is one of our busiest days because I think people work from home on a Friday. And again, the influx and deluge of emails coming through from people who obviously when they're at home, they think about their home, they've got time, they're not travelling, they've got extra headspace to deal with these strata matters that perhaps they normally wouldn't be able to deal with at any other time of the week. And so again, we're finding that with this volume of emails that I think, you're away for a day or two and your inbox is just then trying to catch up and then trying to deal with other urgent matters. I think it's just, the model is just not sustainable. And I think people say, oh, well, managers get paid a lot of money, and that's true. However, no amount of money is going to be able to compensate for burnout.
Yeah. So what changes do you think about making, if you're at this stage yet, in your model? I mean, I know we talk about the model and, these fixed fee, per lot fee for your agreed management, then your additional services, then your insurance commissions. I mean, at the end of the day, as a strata management business owner, it's up to you to decide what you want to do.
Yeah. And I think what's going to start happening, I think, not just in our business, I think, but in general, the quality and standard of our services has to increase, number one. So I think that it's really hard to justify increasing your fees when, you're not performing in terms of what clients expect. So in terms of the advice that your managers give, the timely responses. But I think as well, the two-edged sword is to be able to do that, you need to have extra resources and extra people so that you can then undertake that training of your managers, allow them to be able to focus on certain things while somebody else focuses on another aspect of the management of the building. And I think we have like a co-manager arrangement, and I think that's probably going to be more prevalent, I think, moving forward.
You just said co-manager arrangement. Yes. Can you tell me more about that?
So basically, the majority of our schemes will have two managers. So we have what we call a lead manager, and then we have a co-manager. So the lead manager will deal with certain tasks that are assigned to a building. The co-manager may, for example, work on, managing tasks for the support staff or checking, the 184s and things like that. So we sort of split the workload and task management based on who the lead manager is for that building. That lead manager will normally go to the meetings. The other one doesn't. But if that person's on leave or sick, then the co-manager will then step in. And that co-manager is always copied in all the emails. They've got knowledge of the building. And as time goes on, sometimes the co-manager may move away because the activity level doesn't really warrant as much emphasis on that particular building. But if that does change, then that co-manager then comes back in again. But again, that requires more resourcing. That requires a co-manager also to have less buildings. So it's one of those things where it's a two-edged sword in a way.
And they're both licensed strata managers?
Yes.
And would you say, Reena, from what you know around the area for the buildings that you service, are you priced at the reasonably upper end?
I don't think so, no. I've seen, various price models because obviously when people say, we've got a quote from A, B and C, I think we're sort of more in the middle to upper middle, but not at the top. And I think we probably do need to move to that level to be able to, I think, justify the model that we've got at the moment.
Look, our buildings are only getting more complex. The problems that you've got to solve, getting more complex. We saw some data from Tim McKenzie at Macquarie Bank when I was in Cairns, and the forecasting is the buildings are just getting bigger, and that means more complex facilities, more people on site, contractors, building managers, more for our strata managers to be focused on and to be gaining skills around. So thank you for articulating how you're handling that.
You're absolutely right. The more complex the buildings are, the more difficult they are to manage, and the more education is needed around the managers for them to be able to manage the complexity.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, let's move on to my challenge for this week. Reena, what I wanted to bring to the pod was the new legislation commencing in New South Wales. 1st of July 2025, we heard from the government just last week that is the date for many of the slated reforms to commence. Other reform will commence later this year. But it's not a lot of time. We're recording this, I think it's about second week of June. We've only got a couple of weeks before this commences, and there's a fair bit for strata managers, for committee members, for owners to get across. I started talking about this in a little bit more detail on our Friday Live on our Facebook page last week, and I saw a lot of questions coming through from strata managers. A big one that came through on the page was the new requirement to include an additional motion on your AGM agendas. And that motion is about sustainability. The wording in the new clause in particular is environmental sustainability, and a motion to consider environmental sustainability, including the water rates and the electricity charges for the scheme. That is a new statutory, that is mandatory motion to go on the agenda of every general meeting. And the question I was getting on Friday was, hang on a sec, Amanda, I'm sending out agendas now for meetings that are happening in July. Should I have included that motion because I didn't, and does that mean I'm going to be in breach? Is this something that you've noticed yet, Reena, been thinking about?
No, I haven't thought about it at all.
Join the club, says a lot of our listeners. So I did manage to go and have a bit more of a think about it in between Friday Live and now. And what I do want to confirm is that this is a new requirement to include a motion on agendas going out from the 1st of July.
Which is what I would have assumed it would be.
Yes. So it's not a requirement to make sure you consider this at any meeting that's happening from 1 July onwards. No. It is include this new motion on any agenda going out from 1 July onwards. So if you're sending your agendas now and you don't have that environmental sustainability motion on there, don't panic. You don't need to. You are still legal and compliant. Owners, please don't go bashing your strata manager up over this one if that motion's not on there. But for agendas going out from 1 July 25 onwards, environmental sustainability motion. And do head over to our Facebook page if you want to see a bit more detail on that, and the actual wording of what the motion should be is over on that page as well. Is there anything, Reena, that's in the back of your mind about the reforms or questions that you have? Because the questions you have, others tuning in will.
So, Amanda, I assume that the statutory fees changes for searches is all going to change now from 1 July.
Yes, that you're right. That is all happening 1 July. I'm laughing because one of the changes to the fees is for books and records search. Now, anyone who is not an owner is going to be charged just about double for that search. When I've said that out loud in front of other people, they've said, that's weird. I said, yeah, I think it is too. I'm calling it the lawyer tax. So that when lawyers are coming to search books and records, they have to be charged $60 instead of $31.
The strata searchers would be also paying that, wouldn't they?
Strata, you're right. Yeah. Strata searchers.
On behalf of the perspective. I mean, to me, the fee should be the same whether it's, and I think it should be much higher than what it is, because I think depending on your technological base that you have, a lot of companies are now moving to SharePoint. So with SharePoint, you can just use a link and take out all the privileged stuff. So you can move the privileged stuff onto a separate section of the SharePoint server, and now that's a link. But also making sure that everything has been saved in that directory is really important, Amanda, because when, as we've said before, many documents are emailed. Unless you have some system where you're capturing all those emails into your document management system, then you got to make sure that if there's a search, you got to make sure everything's been saved. And I think that the search fee should be the same, and it should be higher for all, whether you're an owner or a lawyer or a strata searcher. But I think the amount of work required is really the same.
So tell me about this. The fee is payable to the owners corporation,
Yes.
this statutory fee. If you as a strata manager have to do work to put documents together, some strata managers, I'm not sure about you, Reena, have forms on their website, fill in the form,
Yeah, we've got
set
that.
a time.
Yeah.
There's some work involved, maybe some time, some admin. Do you charge additional services for arranging a records
No, we
inspection?
don't. And there's a lot of back and forth actually sometimes, because sometimes if people have a car space, they'll pay a lesser fee, but it's got to be done concurrently with the apartment lot. And sometimes people get that mixed up in terms of, oh no, but I only want to pay for the car space. It's like, no, you've got to pay. That fee is only applicable if you've already paid the full fee for the apartment. So it's all, and again, you're doing extra work to get the ledger ready to show how much that person owes, etc., in terms of levies. But I think I've had to charge more when I've had to go through emails, because we had a request from an owner who was suing the owners corporation who wanted to search all the records and all the emails. Now, because when we do our filing system, we don't assume that there's going to be litigation. So everything's filed for the building in its directory. And therefore, I had to sit there going through every email and taking out all the advices or anything or communication between members. Sometimes people say things as like, no, you don't want anyone to see that. So, they may be saying things about that person which they probably shouldn't be saying. But again, I think to myself, if I leave it
What's
in there.
the lesser evil?
Yeah, well, one day I left something in there and someone had called someone a cockroach, and I shouldn't have left it in there because the amount of trouble that ensued as a result of that email, I thought, oh, God, next time I'll take that one out. But yeah, and so I had to spend a lot of time going through all the emails to make sure that anything that was privileged or anything that was relating to this matter where the committee were talking about tactics and things like that, I had to expunge from the regular, as in like move it, and then just put the ones that everything else into that one directory. So that took me hours. So I had
And
to
are you
charge.
about to? Oh, sorry. Are you about to tell me you didn't charge for that?
No.
Yes,
We had
I
to
agree.
charge.
You should be charging.
And I
for
told
that.
the client, and they were aware, and they, of course, they had no issue with that. But again,
Yes.
this is, as I was alluding to earlier in our discussion about workload, that took me so much time.
Yep.
So therefore, again, I'm taken away from my normal tasks of managing schemes while I'm spending hours going through emails and making sure nothing falls through the cracks. Because as you can imagine, when you're in litigation, anything a matter that you leave that you should, the other side shouldn't see could cause a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important to remember. Not every building is the same. Not every building's in the same situation at the time somebody wants to do a search.
Correct.
If it is the owner who is the adversary of the owners corporation
Yes.
who's doing the search, we do have to be extra careful. If it's not you doing it at your hourly rate, you could as well say to the committee, well, let's get the lawyer to do it
Yes.
at their hourly rate. I've certainly been engaged to do
Yes.
that for buildings in the past where the lawyer is going through the
Yes.
material and making
Yes.
sure that nothing that shouldn't be disclosed is. That all comes at a cost, you're right.
Yeah.
And I don't, any manager who is listening here thinking, oh, I can charge for that? Well, yes, check your contract and make
Exactly.
sure that that's in there, that is an additional service that you provide. But yeah, we come back to this statutory fee. I mean, what's it supposed to be for? It seems very old fashioned then that it's $30 or
Yeah.
$60 if you're not an owner. For what? For clicking a button to open an electronic file.
But all the work behind it, Amanda, that gets you the downloading of the ledgers, the back and forth with, has a fee come in, checking the banking. Oh, yeah, it's received. Screen. I mean, there's so much more than.
Yeah.
I mean, you're actually losing money, I think, for $34. For $34, but sometimes some searches back and forth and, oh, they couldn't find this, they can't, and here it is. Like sometimes searchers can't find documents.
Yes.
Even though they're there. So you got to go back and say, no, if you click on the link, it's still there under insurance or under, legal or under whatever it is. Sometimes they can't find things because they haven't, for an hour, they don't want to spend all that time because they want to worry about charging the client for an hour when someone's about to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on an apartment, if not over $1 million. And they're worried about, charging the client an extra hour for $30 just to try and give themselves more time. Because if they haven't downloaded anything properly, as you go, you get the link, you've got to download everything.
Yeah.
That may take time, and then something is missed, and then we're going back and forth and, I didn't get this and I didn't see that. And it's like, well, it was there. And, and then if you charge and the people get upset if you ask them for another fee, and sometimes it can be quite an arduous process.
Yeah. And I just want to play devil's advocate here a little bit for our listeners who might be thinking, well, Amanda, if the strata manager doesn't have the records in order and ready to go, and have the ability to just press a button and provide that link to the searcher, surely that's their problem. And why should they benefit financially from having to get everything in order and then bill us for something that they should already be doing as the custodian of the records?
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that people should be billed for getting things in order. That's why you have 14 days to agree on a date and time, so that you do have that time to sometimes. But what we're finding now, a lot of people leave it to the last minute. They want to bid on something, like let's say searcher comes to us, the clients come to them last minute, auctions tomorrow, they need to do an urgent search. So I'm not saying, again, we come back to the volume of emails, we come back to the volume of work, and you want to make sure that you've given everything to the searcher that they need to see. But on the other hand, you may have been in an NCAT hearing and something's come through in your emails that no one else has access to and that hasn't been filed or saved or whatever. So, yeah, I think it's a give and take thing, but I think more it's just about the fact that $34, to me, that's just a meal at a restaurant. Like, it really,
a cheap one.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably an entree maybe. And so if you look at the time taken, the personnel, it is putting anything in order does take time properly. You can put anything into a directory, but if you got to rename it, like we rename everything, so that person opening it doesn't have to open 10 documents to see what they are, but they can say, oh, hang on, that's that agenda, that's that document, that's a supporting thing, that's the email. So it's all saved in a way that is easy for that person searching to find out, not having to spend their time going through documents where they're all got the doc 1275843 open every single document, which is what sometimes we get when we get handed over records to managers.
I know. So, yes, that is a couple of the changes that we have on the horizon from 1 July. Many more to come. And if you're listening in and you have specific questions about that new legislation, Reena and I would love to hear them, whether you're a strata manager or an owner. Send them through to us, post them as a comment under the episode, and we can unpack them in a future chat. There's going to be lots to talk about.
I'm sure there will be, Amanda.
6, 12, 18 months. In my last episode, I mentioned the tribunal litigation that inevitably folds out years after reform.
Yes.
We saw that when our 2015 Act came into force. And look, this isn't as significant a reform as that was, but there are big changes there, and there are a few things with question marks around them that I think will need to be tested in the tribunal. So,
yeah, definitely, Amanda.
Lots on the horizon for Strataland as usual. Time to shift over to our wins. What's your win this week, Reena?
Well, the win this week, Amanda, is the withdrawal of an application by about 4 or 5 owners against the orders that were made by the Tribunal for Compulsory Management by our company. And I've been having sort of emails back and forth with this previous committee that was in charge, who probably didn't understand how the section 237 works, whereby depending on the orders, some orders, obviously do give the manager less authority depending on what the issues are in the building and why the orders are made. But these people put on an urgent application, number one, to obviously to what they deemed to ameliorate the harshness of compulsory management. Right. That was dismissed in terms of being an urgent application. Then we had our directions hearing. And pretty much I think what the member tried to allude to was that they really had to understand that when you're taking legal action against the Owners Corporation, you really should get some legal advice on the merits of the case and also what you're able to seek in terms of and what the tribunal can make in terms of orders. And I'll just perhaps, this is actually I think the first for me because I've done many of these compulsory managements and I've never really had people that really don't understand what it means.
Right.
And whereby the reasons were to afford us owners a modicum of fairness after our democratic rights were preliminarily taken away upon the imposition of compulsory management. Now,
those are the reasons for seeking the order that these owners put in their application.
Yes.
Right.
And some of the things that they wanted were the ability for the previous chairperson to convene and hold general meetings of the Owners Corporation, to elect a chairperson, secretary and treasurer, also an order permitting him to convene and hold monthly general meetings, an order for our company to immediately and comprehensively report in writing to all the owners, to the secretary, their progress in arranging the affecting repairs to the lot that was the applicant, an order requiring Strata Central to report 3 monthly to NCAT of what's happening.
An
order about the fees, which are, in their opinion, deemed to be excessive and replaced by fees that are fair and reasonable to both parties. And it goes on and on and on.
Wow, that's creative.
Yeah, exactly. So this building, we're supposed to get it at the beginning of March. The previous manager who had it for 3 months, who was compulsorily appointed for 3 months, who hadn't done what they were supposed to do and obviously spent a lot of money of the Owners Corporation doing other things, but I won't go into that today. So it took us a month to get the records. By the time we got the records, there was $1,500 in the bank. And anyway, and so we had to go through all the financials. We had to we did 2 report letters to all the owners. The first one just before Easter on the 17th of April, the second one on the 6th of May. So to say that people weren't informed of what was going on, I think was a bit of an understatement. I think that even if you're under normal management, you probably wouldn't have got an update in such a short amount of time frame. But it was just interesting to see how people, really don't understand. And I think the member was trying to allude to them to actually, and she said, "Are you sure you want to continue?" He said, "Yep." So anyway, they went ahead, and then the member asked if they were unsuccessful, would the Owners Corporation be seeking legal costs? And I said, absolutely.
Yep.
Because basically putting the Owners Corporation to extra. And also what I was trying to allude to is that while we are trying to get things on the building, by taking our focus away by having to deal with this application was not in the best interest of the Owners Corporation. They've had about 4 different strata managers. Yeah, and I said that your resources would be better spent if we were attending to repairs and maintenance in the building as opposed to being sidetracked on this application that really had no merit and was not going to succeed in any event. And that sort of came about when I said to him, but we are the Owners Corporation.
Yes.
I go, no, I am the Owners. We are the Owners Corporations. And that, I think, it was a concept that they could not really understand. So anyway, last week I just got an email on Thursday basically withdrawing the application. So they had to get each person to sign and they're nearly there. So, yeah, that was just very good news because I think that, again, would have been not a good outcome for the building. And I said to him, I do want to work with you. And I said for all the owners constructively, but that's what the auditors were trying to achieve. And I think during the directions hearing, he said to the member, I don't have access to the funds of the Owners Corporation for legal fees. And she said, but, why would you think you would have that? So I think, again, the fact that people don't understand that, just because they're on the committee, having access to owners' funds to
run your own application.
Yeah. And then one of the things that was interesting was that he said, but, we're acting in the best interests of the Owners Corporation. And then the member said, so you say. So I think in a sense, what I tried to also explain to the owners in one of my report letters is that compulsory management only happens when there is terrible dysfunction or, in this particular case, an owner who hasn't had the use of a bathroom for more than 3 years. So, and people might talk about people's, personalities and all that, and there is always a lot of that involved in these types of things. However, you don't end up having compulsory management if you're ticking all the boxes. It's as you know, Amanda, being a lawyer, these orders are hard to obtain. The amount of evidence required is onerous. It's not just a matter of, saying you haven't held a few meetings here and there. It's much more than that. And when orders of these type are made and then extended, I think part of the problem was that this owner was told to use a certain company because that was what the contractor said to her. Why don't you use this company? That person's my Strata company. She didn't know any better. She went and got them appointed. They obviously didn't do the right thing by not doing what they were supposed to do. And then she had a recommendation to appoint our company or to put forward our company. And this time it was actually a year. So the first time was only 3 months. This time it was a year. So that again tells you that something is not right when the new orders are for a much longer period than the initial ones were for.
How many owners in the building?
About 41.
And how many on this application?
5 or 6 from memory, yeah.
And when the applicant filed for compulsory appointment to appoint you, was there any response to that? Did these owners who later filed the current application, did they object at the time?
They were involved, yeah.
Yeah.
And then one of the reasons they said that they didn't have any say, but they did have a say. They just didn't understand that their say wasn't really probably – I'm not sure – I haven't gone through all the past documents to see what statements were put on by them or what role they played. But they were all at the hearing and they were all there. So
and would have had the opportunity to appeal the order.
Yes. Yeah.
It sounds to me, just from what you read out, that this was an attempt at a quasi-appeal, an appeal through the back door.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I think I've said this before, where tribunal members can, at that first directions hearing, make statements, not forming a view. It's very important that they don't do that without a hearing, but make very clear statements as to what the law means. And if it is very obvious that applicants are on the wrong track to make that clear, that is just so helpful.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what this member said at that first directions hearing really made these applicants go away, think about it, and,
Yes.
and decide not to put their owners corporation, their fellow owners,
Yeah.
to the cost and trouble and trauma of for more legal proceedings.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also what people don't understand is that at the end of the day, like, people don't understand necessarily mathematics, they don't understand the law, and therefore they do find it hard to deal with these types of things when they do happen. I do understand, Amanda, that like for an average layperson, like I gave them all the financials from the previous manager. I said, this is why we're in our predicament. We only have $1,500, blah, blah. And then I get an email from one of these saying, oh, we don't know anything about our finances. It's like, well, I gave you all the information that I received. You know, it's all available on our portal. Every day you can go down and have a look who's paid, who's not paid. And in fact, what I've heard is there was a special levy that was struck by the previous manager that was now due on 1 April. And apparently there's a little group that are telling people not to pay their levy. Now, I don't know, that's going to help get, bills paid and repairs done. But anyway, that's a story for another day. I'll just have to deal with that one when it happens.
Well, good luck with this building and solving the problems there, Reena. From my point of view, they're lucky to have you, and I can say that from an educated position where I have acted for owners who are in buildings where you are the compulsory manager. I've acted for owners in buildings where there are other managers who are the compulsory manager, and I have to say your disclosure and your transparency and the documents that you give owners to make sure everyone's informed about what you're doing is above and beyond what many other managers are doing.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah. Keep it up. My win for this week is a little bit different. I debated whether to bring this one. It's a bit left of field, but here goes. There is a member in our community who has had a couple of wins in NCAT over the years. A win getting orders to prevent her neighbour from smoking on the balcony, stop the smoke drift.
Oh, wow.
Then a win in relation to some damage to her lot property because of a leak. So really educated in the Strata verse, quite confident, working hard to bring a old-fashioned recalcitrant, let's say, committee into line and work with a manager who maybe has been in the business a little bit too long. Notwithstanding those wins, she has, for the last year or so, continued to struggle with getting her owners corporation to raise sufficient funds to plan for the future, to repair some other problems around the building. She has felt that the writing is on the wall a little bit for this building. She's concerned about big fees coming up down the line that she would prefer to budget for now, doesn't want to have to deal with then. She decided very recently to sell. And she has never been happier.
Wow, that's amazing, Amanda.
Yes. So this is a really interesting one because, look, it's a rare case, but it does happen. It's happened, I can think of a few times that has happened where I've been talking to a client who's in a really difficult situation, may not have the money to litigate or may have litigated and may still not be getting the outcome that they need. And I've had to float the idea, maybe this building isn't for you. Maybe it's time to move on. Maybe you do need to sell. And it's such a big decision to make, I know, especially if you've been somewhere for a long time. It's your home. Maybe you've got kids as well, changing areas. It's expensive to sell. If you buy something else, you're paying stamp duty on that property. It's a really hard decision to make. But I watched this particular member make this decision fully informed, with great confidence, feeling great relief when it was done, and just knowing that she had done the best she could in that building. She'd had her wins. She could see that others were stuck in their ways, weren't going to come along for the ride. She didn't feel she had the energy to continue to drag them along or to wait for others to sell and move, or a new manager or things like that. And she decided to sell. And I wanted to bring that here and say, you know what, that's an option. And it can be a brave step to take. And for some people, it's the right decision.
I think it's a great outcome, Amanda, but I was also thinking about her next property that she's going to buy and whether or not, how is she going to do her research to make sure that she doesn't sort of end up in the same position or not, maybe not as bad as where she has come from, but in another place where on the face of it, it all looks okay. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, I suppose she's got a lot of experience now in terms of looking at the finances, seeing what money's in the kitty, seeing what work needs to be done, and hopefully being able to make a more an educated decision as opposed to probably the first time she bought in this particular her previous property that she's now sold.
Yeah, great point. And I think you're right. I think she's learned a lot along the way. And I'm not sure what her next steps are, whether she plans to buy again in Strata, whether she's going to rent somewhere else and doesn't want to own in Strata anymore, or buy something that's not Strata titled. But if she does buy Strata, she's going to have all of that knowledge to be able to apply to making the best decision available to her, doing that research, buying into a building that perhaps has already been through that process. If it's an older building, we get these 40-year-old buildings that suddenly everything needs to be done at once. Trying to maybe avoid that, maybe avoid the brand new buildings with the building defects, and have a close look, to the extent this is available on the records, about the harmony in the building and how owners are communicating with each other, and what the history looks like there from a neighbourhood and neighbourliness perspective.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you make of Amanda about the harmony, because I think a lot of the times the issues aren't related to necessarily the financial or the other things, but it's the disharmony that occurs because people like your member decides to say something, and then that person is put in a position where they're seen as a bad person, they're seen as a troublemaker because they're obviously rocking the boat. But even though all they're trying to do is say, well, I just want my home fixed, I just want money in the bank, I want to be able to try and live in a building where we know that when something happens, we're able to pay for it. And I think that's not a big ask, and that's what I think the legislation is trying to bring into practical effect. However, I think that would make it a bit easier if I think the government looked at the Capital Fund forecasts, works plan, they're called, or whatever they're called now, and make sure that buildings are moving towards those types of balances, even though we know those balances aren't accurate. But usually what's in the bank and those balances are usually, there's a big disparity between those amounts. And I think this is why your member had to, do the worst thing in a sense, which is to sell. I mean, at the end of the day, like you said, you got to buy stamp duty, there's the unknown of the next thing. But and I understand, you just become exhausted from it all. It's quite taxing and it's quite, hard on people when they've got their normal life to deal with, their jobs, their families, and then they've got to deal with this on the third job.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure there's so many who are listening who can relate. So just important to remember there's always options. You're never stuck. Yeah. And whatever decision, I always say, whatever decision you make, it's the right one. It's the right one in that moment for you at that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Reena Van Aalst, it's been so lovely sitting on the couch with you. I think what's happened, because we're together and we're chatting and we're relaxed, our podcast is about twice as long as it normally is. So I hope you've enjoyed, dear listener, and learned a few things along the way perhaps. And if you do have questions for us, please do drop a comment under this episode on the website. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Reena, probably not in person, over a computer screen once more.
Yeah, exactly. Back to the real world, Amanda.
That's right. Safe travels home. Okay. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Amanda. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Your Strata Property, the podcast which consistently delivers to property owners reliable and accurate information about their strata property. You can access all the information below this episode via the show notes at yourstrataproperty.com.au.